The funeral director handed me a tissue like I was some fragile flower about to wilt. I wasn't crying. I was calculating how much this whole charade was costing and wondering if Dad would have laughed at the ridiculous flower arrangements shaped like tractors. My name is Riley Fletcher, and I'd just buried the only person in my family who ever believed I had a brain in my head. "Riley, honey, you look so thin," Aunt Martha whispered, squeezing my arm. "City life treating you okay?" "Just fine, thanks." I smoothed down my black dress and scanned the crowd of flannel shirts and work boots. 3 years away felt like 30 when you're standing in a room full of people who still think your biggest accomplishment was winning the county fair pie contest at 16. The real show started after the service, back at the farmhouse where I'd grown up. My brothers Uriah and Harrison had already claimed Dad's old leather chair and the kitchen table like they were marking territory. Uriah, 44 and built like the bulldozer he drove, was holding court with the neighbors. Harrison, 3 years younger but twice as eager to please, nodded along to everything his big brother said. "So, what's the plan for the farm?" asked Jim from down the road, helping himself to another beer from our fridge. "Well," Uriah said, shooting me a look, "the three of us inherited equal shares, but Harrison and I will handle the actual running of things. Riley's got her little city job to get back to." Little city job. I had a degree in urban design and worked for one of Chicago's top planning firms, but sure, little city job. "Actually," I said, setting down my coffee cup harder than necessary, "I was thinking we should discuss some options. The eastern field would be perfect for—" "Riley!" Uriah's voice had that tone, the same one he'd used when I was 12 and suggested we rotate crops instead of planting corn in the same spot every year. "Let's be realistic here. You've been gone 3 years. Harrison and I know this land. I grew up on this land too. Yeah, but you were always more interested in drawing pictures than getting your hands dirty." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone watching, waiting to see if little Riley would make a scene at her own father's funeral reception. "Drawing pictures," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling the irrigation system redesign that saved us $12,000 in water costs my senior year of high school?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "That was different. You were just what? Just a kid who spent every summer from age 8 hauling hay bales and fixing fence posts while you two were off playing football." "Riley, come on." Uriah stood up, all 6'3" of him. "You're getting emotional. This is exactly why Dad left the farm to all 3 of us, but expected Harrison and me to actually run it." Emotional. There it was. The magic word that had followed me around this place my entire life. Too emotional to understand business. Too emotional to make hard decisions. Too emotional to be trusted with anything that mattered. "You know what?" I smiled sweetly. "You're absolutely right. I am emotional. I'm emotionally invested in not watching you two run this place into the ground like you did with the North pasture." "That wasn't our fault," Harrison protested. The drought I warned you about 6 months early when I sent you those climate reports? The one you said I was being dramatic about?" Uriah stepped closer. "Look, we appreciate your input, but Harrison and I have been working this farm while you've been playing around in the big city. We know what we're doing." "Right. Like when you decided to plant soybeans in the field that floods every spring. That was one mistake. Or when you bought that used tractor without checking the engine and it died 2 weeks later." The room was dead silent now. Even Aunt Martha had stopped pretending to wash dishes. "You know what, Riley?" Uriah's face was getting red. "Maybe it's better if you just take your share of the profits and let the men handle things." Let the men handle things. I'd heard that phrase more times than I could count, usually right before something went spectacularly wrong. I was about to respond when I noticed something. The old wooden stool by the back door, Dad's favorite spot for putting on his work boots, had a piece of paper sticking out from underneath the seat cushion, something white and folded, like it had been tucked there deliberately. "Fine," I said, walking toward the door. You two handle things. I'm sure it'll work out great. I pulled the paper free as casually as I could. My name was written on it in Dad's careful handwriting. Just Riley in blue ink, like he'd been saving it for the right moment. My heart started pounding as I slipped the letter into my purse. Whatever Dad had wanted to tell me, he'd made sure my brothers wouldn't see it first. And something told me this conversation was far from over. I waited until I was back at the motel before opening Dad's letter. My hands were actually shaking as I unfolded the paper, which was ridiculous. I'm 35 years old, not some kid waiting for a report card. Riley, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your brothers are probably treating you like you don't belong. They get that from their mother's side. All bluster, no vision. You get your vision from me. Don't let them convince you that caring about something makes you weak. The farm needs someone who sees possibilities, not just problems. Trust your gut, sweetheart. It's never steered you wrong. The East Field has more potential than they know. Remember that. Love, Dad. P.S. Check the county planning office. Big changes coming to the rail line. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Dad knew. He knew exactly what would happen after he died, and he'd left me a roadmap. The next morning, I called Caroline. We'd been best friends since elementary school, back when she was the only other girl who thought it was stupid that boys got to drive the tractors while we had to collect eggs. Now she was a real estate lawyer in the state capital, and if anyone would know about rail line changes, it would be her. Riley Fletcher, you beautiful disaster, she answered on the second ring. How are you holding up? I need a favor. Can you look into something for me? Already on it. I heard about the funeral. Your brothers being their charming selves? Worse. They basically told me to take my share of the profits and let the men handle things. Caroline made a sound like she was choking. They said what now? You heard me, so I need to know about this rail line expansion Dad mentioned. What's happening with the Eastern Corridor? Oh, honey. Caroline's voice changed completely. You don't know, do you? The state approved a commuter rail extension 6 months ago. It's going to run right along the eastern edge of your county. Your farm is literally going to be 15 minutes from downtown by train. My heart started racing. How eastern are we talking? Let me pull up the maps. Okay, yeah. The proposed station is maybe 2 miles from your property line. Riley, do you understand what this means? Your land value is about to go through the roof. I sat down hard on the motel bed. How much are we talking? For prime development land near a rail station, in a county that's been zoned for mixed-use development? We're talking maybe 10 times what it's worth for farming. 10 times. I did the math in my head. My third of the farm was roughly 80 acres. At current agricultural prices, that was maybe $300,000. But if Caroline was right. I need to see those zoning maps, I said. I'll email them to you right now. But Riley, there's something else. There's been talk about your area for months. Developers are circling like vultures, but they need someone local to make the first move, someone with actual land rights. What kind of developers? The good kind, sustainable housing, green spaces, community-focused development, not strip malls and parking lots. There's this woman, Vera Mann, who's been trying to get meetings with landowners in your area for 6 months. Your brothers keep shutting her down at township meetings. Of course they did. What's her deal? She builds these amazing eco-friendly communities, tiny homes, community gardens, solar everything. The kind of development that actually improves property values instead of destroying them. I was quiet for a long moment, staring at Dad's letter. Caroline, hypothetically, if I wanted to sell my share of the farm, what would I need to do? Hypothetically? You'd need to get it surveyed and legally separated from your brother's portions. It would take maybe 2 weeks if you had a good lawyer. She paused. Which you do. And they couldn't stop me? Not if you own it outright. Equal inheritance means equal rights, Riley. They can't force you to farm if you don't want to. That afternoon, I drove out to the east field. It was beautiful land, rolling hills, good drainage, close to the main road, but far enough back to feel private. I could picture it exactly the way Caroline had described Vera's developments. Small houses tucked between trees, walking paths, maybe a community center where the old barn stood. My phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. Family meeting tonight. 7 p.m. We need to discuss the solar panel idea you mentioned. Solar panels. I'd suggested them 2 years ago when energy costs were killing our profit margins. They'd laughed and said I was living in Fantasyland. I texted back, "I'll be there." But first, I had a phone call to make. Caroline had sent me Vera Mann's contact information, and something told me this conversation was going to be very interesting. I dialed the number and waited. Vera Mann speaking. "Ms. Mann, this is Riley Fletcher. I understand you've been trying to meet with landowners in Millfield County." Riley Fletcher. Her voice perked up immediately. "I heard you might be ready to make something big happen." I met Vera at a coffee shop 2 towns over. No point in giving the local gossips more ammunition than they already had. She was nothing like I'd expected. Mid-40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked more expensive than my entire outfit. Her handshake could have cracked walnuts. "Your brothers hate me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm the outsider scum who wants to destroy their precious farmland." They said that? Uriah did, at the last township meeting. Called me a carpetbagger who didn't understand rural values. She smiled. "I grew up on a dairy farm in Vermont." I liked her immediately. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Vera pulled out a tablet and swiped to a photo gallery. "This is what I do. Sustainable micro-communities, 40 to 60 small homes, all solar-powered, built around green spaces and community gardens. We preserve as many existing trees as possible and add native plants." The photos were gorgeous. Tiny houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine, connected by walking paths and surrounded by gardens. Kids playing in a central park area while adults worked in raised garden beds. "The average home is 800 square feet, Vera continued. "Perfect for young professionals who want to live near the new rail line but can't afford traditional housing prices. We're talking about a community, not a subdivision. What kind of money are we talking about? For your 80 acres? Assuming we can get the zoning approved, I'd pay $4 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. $4 million? The rail line changes everything. Your land is going to be prime real estate whether you sell to me or someone else. The question is whether you want it developed responsibly or turned into another strip mall." I thought about the Walmart that had killed downtown 3 counties over. "What would you need from me?" "Full ownership of your portion, plus cooperation on the access road. The eastern field is perfect because it connects to County Road 15. But we'd need to upgrade the infrastructure." "My brothers would never agree to that." Vera's smile was sharp. "They don't have to. If you own your third outright, you control access to their portions too. The main road runs along your property line." I stared at her. "You're saying I could sell my land and they'd have to go through me to get to theirs?" "I'm saying property rights are property rights. If they want access to the county road, they'd need to negotiate with whoever owns the access point." This was getting interesting. "Let me ask you something," I said. "Have you seen our farm operation? What my brothers are actually doing with the land?" "I drive by sometimes. It's not exactly cutting-edge agriculture." That was putting it nicely. Last month, they'd planted corn in a field that hadn't been properly fertilized in 3 years. The crop yield was going to be pathetic. "They're running it into the ground," I said. "Dad left us equal shares, but they act like I'm some city girl who doesn't know dirt from diamonds." "Are you?" "I spent every summer until I was 18 working that farm. I know exactly how much money they're losing every season." Vera leaned forward. "Then why not do something about it?" I thought about Dad's letter. "Trust your gut, sweetheart." "If I did this," I said slowly, "how quickly could it happen?" "I can have contracts drawn up by tomorrow. Zoning approval takes about 6 weeks, but I can start the process immediately. We could close in 2 months. And my brothers? Would find out when the surveyors show up. The family meeting that night was exactly what I'd expected. Uriah had printed out some article about solar panel maintenance costs. Harrison had a calculator and a legal pad covered in numbers that didn't add up. "So here's the thing about your solar idea," Uriah said, not bothering with hello. "The initial investment is too high, and the payback period is too long." "How long?" I asked. 7 years. Minimum. "And how long have we been losing money on the north pasture?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "That's different." "Is it? Because I'm looking at land that could be profitable immediately, instead of maybe breaking even in 7 years. "Riley, you don't understand the economics of farming," Uriah said. "This isn't some city planning project where you can just redesign everything." "You're right," I said. "It's not a city planning project, it's a business. And businesses need to make money." "We make money." "Do we? Because last time I checked, you took out a loan against the equipment to cover operating costs." The silence stretched out. Harrison was staring at his calculator like it might provide answers. "How did you know about the loan?" Uriah asked quietly. "Dad told me. Before he died. He was worried about the debt. We're handling it. By planting the same crops in the same fields and hoping for better weather?" Uriah stood up. "You know what, Riley? If you don't like how we're running things, maybe you should just sell your share and let us buy you out." I smiled. "That's actually not a bad idea." "Good. We can probably manage 15,000 an acre." 15,000. For land that was about to be worth 50,000 an acre. "I'll think about it," I said. But I'd already made up my mind. I was going to call Vera as soon as I got back to the motel. My brothers had just given me permission to do exactly what I wanted to do. The bulldozers showed up on a Tuesday morning at 7:30 sharp. I was sitting on the motel balcony with my coffee, watching the sun come up over the east field, when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. My phone started ringing 30 seconds later. What the hell is going on? Uriah's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Good morning to you too. Riley, there are bulldozers on our land. What did you do?" "I sold my share, just like you suggested." The silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "You what?" "Sold my share. You know, that thing you said I should do if I didn't like how you were running things?" "To who?" "Vera Mann, the carpetbagger you hate so much. Turns out she pays a lot better than 15,000 an acre." I could hear Harrison in the background asking what was happening. "How much?" Uriah's voice was deadly quiet. $4 million. $4 million. He was sputtering now. "Riley, you can't just sell without telling us." "Actually, I can. Caroline made sure all the paperwork was in order. Equal inheritance means equal rights, remember? But the access road runs through my property. Well, Vera's property now." Another long silence. Then Harrison grabbed the phone. "Riley, please tell me you didn't really do this." "I really did this. But we're family." "Family that told me to let the men handle things. So I did. I let a very capable woman handle it instead." I hung up and called Caroline. "How's it going over there?" she asked. "The bulldozers just arrived. My brothers are having a collective meltdown." "Good." Vera's lawyer called this morning. "The zoning approval is moving faster than expected. Apparently the county is very excited about the tax revenue potential." "And the access issue?" "Oh, that's the beautiful part. Since Vera now controls the main road access, your brothers will need to lease usage rights if they want to get their equipment in and out." "How much are we talking?" $5,000 a month. Each." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Each?" "Commercial vehicle access isn't cheap. And technically, they're running a business that requires heavy machinery access to county roads. $10,000 a month just to get to their own land." I should have felt guilty, but mostly I felt satisfied. My phone rang again. This time it was Harrison. and he sounded like he was crying. "Riley, you have to fix this. We can't afford $10,000 a month in access fees." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I was too emotional to have opinions about the family business." "We never said that. You said I was too emotional to handle the farm. You said I should let the men handle things. You said I lived in Fantasyland. Should I keep going?" "That's not... We didn't mean..." "What did you mean, Harrison?" He was quiet for a long moment. "We meant that you don't understand farming." "I understand farming just fine. I also understand business and real estate. And the fact that you two have been running this place into debt for 3 years. How did you know about the debt?" "Because I'm not stupid, despite what you and Uriah seem to think. Dad told me about the loans. He told me about the failed crops. He told me he was worried about what would happen to the farm after he died." "So you decided to destroy it?" "I decided to save my piece of it." The local newspaper ran the story on the front page the next day. "Fletcher Farm sold to developers. Sister strikes historic deal." The photo showed me shaking hands with Vera in front of the construction equipment, both of us smiling. I was having lunch at the diner when Uriah finally showed up. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm listening." "This is our family's land, Riley. 4 generations of Fletchers have worked this farm. And now 1 generation of Fletchers has made more money from it than the previous 4 combined. It's not about the money, isn't it? Because last week you offered to buy me out for a fraction of what it was worth. That seemed pretty money-focused to me." Uriah leaned forward. "You're destroying everything Dad built. Dad built a farm that was losing money every year. I turned it into something profitable. You turned it into a housing development. I turned my third of it into a housing development. You're welcome to keep farming your 2/3. Assuming you can afford the access fees." "Riley, please, we're family." "We're family when you need something. The rest of the time, I'm just the emotional little sister who doesn't understand the real world." He stared at me for a long moment. "What do you want?" "I want you to admit that I was right. About the solar panels, about crop rotation, about the irrigation system, about every single suggestion you laughed at over the years. Fine, you were right. And I want you to admit that calling me too emotional was just your way of dismissing me because I'm a woman." His jaw tightened. That's exactly what it was." He stood up abruptly. "You know what? Keep your money. Keep your development. But don't expect us to pretend this didn't happen. I wouldn't dream of it." He walked out without another word. Through the diner window, I watched him climb into his truck and drive away. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Saw the newspaper. How does it feel to be the most powerful woman in the county?" I typed back, "Like I should have done this years ago." Meredith Hunter knocked on my motel door at 8 in the morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the same determined expression she'd had when she ran the PTA for 20 years. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the room. "Good morning to you too, Meredith." She poured coffee into 2 paper cups and handed me one. "Sit down, honey. It's time you heard some family history your brothers don't know." I sat. Meredith had been Dad's neighbor for 30 years and knew more about our family than we did. "Your great-grandmother Sarah wanted to plant apple orchards on the South Hill," she began. "The men said fruit trees were too risky. Your grandmother Ruth suggested raising sheep instead of just cattle. The men said she didn't understand livestock. Your mother wanted to start a farm stand to sell directly to customers. The men said it was too much work." I'm sensing a pattern. "Every generation," Meredith continued, "the women in your family had ideas, good ideas, and every generation, the men shut them down. Your father was different, though. He listened to your mother. That's why the farm survived as long as it did. What happened to the women's ideas? Sarah's apple orchard idea? The Johnsons planted one 5 years later and made a fortune. Ruth's sheep? The Millers started raising them and cornered the local wool market. Your mother's farm stand? 3 families in the county run them now, making more per acre than traditional farming ever could. I stared into my coffee. So, I'm not the first Fletcher woman to be told she doesn't understand farming. Honey, you're the first one with enough money and legal knowledge to do something about it. My phone had been ringing all morning. Word travels fast in small towns, and apparently, everyone had opinions about what I'd done. The first few calls were predictable. Angry farmers calling me a traitor, old-timers saying I'd destroyed the family legacy. But then the calls started getting interesting. Is this Riley Fletcher? The voice was young, female. Yes. My name is Jessica. I run a small organic farm about 20 miles from you. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for what? For showing these old boys that women can make business decisions too. My husband's been telling me for 2 years that my ideas for expanding into farmers' markets are too risky. After seeing what you did, I'm doing it anyway. 3 more calls like that came in over the next hour. Women thanking me for shaking up the old boys club. One was a young mother who wanted to start a daycare center, but whose father-in-law kept saying it wasn't a real business. Another was a teacher who'd been trying to get funding for a school garden program. You've become a symbol, Caroline said when I called her. Like it or not, you're the woman who stood up to the patriarchy and won. I just sold some land. You did a lot more than that, and you know it. That evening, Harrison showed up at my motel room. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothes that hadn't been changed in days. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I opened the door wider. He sat down heavily on the chair by the window. Uriah doesn't know I'm here, he said. Okay. Riley, we're in trouble, real trouble. How much trouble? He pulled out a folder full of papers, bank statements, loan documents, bills. We owe $200,000. The equipment loans, the operating expenses, the seed money for this year's crops. Dad was covering most of it before he died, but we didn't know how bad it was. I looked through the papers. It was worse than I'd thought. They'd been borrowing against next year's harvest to pay for this year's expenses. How long do you have? 6 months, maybe, if we have a good harvest and prices stay high. He laughed bitterly. But you know how likely that is. What does Uriah say? Uriah thinks we can work our way out of it. He's talking about taking out another loan against the remaining land. Harrison, that's insane. You'll lose everything. I know. He put his head in his hands. I know, okay? But what choice do we have? You took the only valuable piece of the property. I took my piece of the property, the piece I inherited fair and square. I'm not blaming you. He looked up at me. Actually, that's not true. I am blaming you. But I also understand why you did it. We sat in silence for a moment. Do you remember when Mom got sick? He asked suddenly. Of course. Do you remember how Dad cried in the barn because he couldn't afford her insulin and the mortgage payment in the same month? I nodded. I'd been 16, hiding in the hayloft, listening to my father sob. I swore I'd never let that happen again, that I'd make the farm profitable enough to take care of the family. He laughed bitterly. Instead, I'm about to lose it all. Harrison! No, let me finish. You were right about the solar panels. You were right about crop rotation. You were right about the irrigation system. You were right about everything, and we were too proud to listen. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Uriah wants to fight the access fees in court, but Caroline says we don't have a case. You don't? Then I guess we're going to lose the farm. He stood up. I just wanted you to know that I don't hate you for what you did. I hate that it came to this, but I don't hate you. After he left, I sat staring at those financial documents for a long time. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Fletcher, this is Vera Mann. I have a proposition that might interest you. Can we meet tomorrow? I texted back. What kind of proposition? The kind that might help your family and the community at the same time. Vera met me at the construction site the next morning. The foundation work was already underway, and I could see the skeleton of what would become the first micro-homes. Workers in hard hats were moving with purpose, turning my childhood memories into something entirely new. "It's really happening," I said, watching a crane position steel beams. "Faster than I expected. The county fast-tracked our permits." Vera handed me a coffee. "Turns out they're very motivated by the tax revenue projections." "You said you had a proposition?" "Walk with me." We headed toward the area where the old chicken coop used to stand. "I've been talking to some investors about expanding the project, not just housing, but community infrastructure." "What kind of infrastructure?" "A women's entrepreneurship center, business incubators, shared office space, meeting rooms, childcare facilities, a place where women can start businesses without having to drive an hour to the city." I stopped walking. "You want to build that here?" "I want you to help me build it. Your story has gotten attention, Riley. Regional newspapers, a few blogs, even some interest from a documentary filmmaker. You've become the face of rural women fighting back against old boys' networks." "I just sold some land." "You did a lot more than that." Vera pulled out her tablet and showed me architectural drawings. This would be a 15,000 square foot facility. Conference rooms, co-working spaces, a commercial kitchen for food entrepreneurs, even a small retail showroom. The drawings were beautiful, modern but warm, with lots of natural light and green spaces. How much would something like this cost? $2 million for construction, another $1 million for equipment in the first year of operations. That's a lot of money. It is, but I have investors lined up for most of it. What I need is a local partner, someone with credibility in the community who can help make this more than just another development project. What are you asking me to do? Be the public face, help with fundraising, maybe contribute some of your own money as seed funding. She paused. And let us name it after you. I stared at the drawings. A building with my name on it, dedicated to helping women start businesses. 6 months ago, my brothers were telling me I was too emotional to have opinions about farming. How much seed funding? $500,000 would make a real statement, show that you're committed to the community, not just taking the money and running. $500,000. It was a lot of money, but I'd still have more than enough left over to do whatever I wanted with my life. I need to think about it. Of course. But Riley, there's something else. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the housing development is scheduled for next month. The mayor wants to make it a big event. Press coverage, regional politicians, the works. And? I'd like you to speak, tell your story, show people that this isn't just about development, it's about giving rural women a voice. That afternoon, Caroline called with news. "I just got off the phone with Mayor Lucas," she said. "He wants to meet with you about the entrepreneurship center idea." "Vera told you about that?" "Vera told everyone about that. Riley, do you understand what's happening here? You're not just some woman who sold her farm anymore. You're becoming a regional power player." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You've got $4 million, political connections, and a story that's resonating with women across 3 counties. The mayor wants to discuss tax incentives for the entrepreneurship center. The State Economic Development Office is interested in using your project as a model for other rural areas." I was quiet for a moment. "Caroline, what if I mess this up? What if you don't? What if you actually help change things for women in rural communities?" That evening, I drove out to Dad's grave. The cemetery was quiet, just me and the sound of wind through the oak trees. "I don't know if you'd be proud of what I did, Dad," I said to his headstone. "I know you loved that land, but I couldn't let them keep treating me like I didn't matter." The wind picked up, rustling the flowers someone had left on a nearby grave. "Vera wants me to put my name on a building. Can you believe that? The girl who used to hide in the hayloft might have a building named after her." I pulled out my phone and called Vera. "I'll do it," I said when she answered. "The speaking engagement? All of it. The entrepreneurship center, the seed funding, the ribbon-cutting speech. All of it. Riley, that's fantastic. What changed your mind? I looked at Dad's grave, thinking about all the Fletcher women who'd had their ideas dismissed over the years. I realized that this isn't just about me anymore. It's about making sure other women don't have to choose between family and being heard. We're going to change things, aren't we? We already are. After I hung up, I stayed at the cemetery for another hour, watching the sun set over the fields where I'd grown up. Tomorrow, I'd start planning a speech that would either make me a hero or a villain in this town. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The red dress had been Caroline's idea. "You need to look like someone who belongs in boardrooms, not barns," she'd said. It was designer, cost more than I used to make in a month, and made me feel like I was wearing armor. I arrived at the ribbon-cutting ceremony in Vera's Tesla, which probably annoyed half the crowd before I even got out of the car. The development looked incredible. 12 tiny homes clustered around a central green space, solar panels glinting in the morning sun, walking paths lined with native wildflowers. Mayor Lucas was already working the crowd, shaking hands and posing for photos. Local news crews had set up cameras near the ribbon, and I spotted reporters from 3 regional newspapers. "You ready for this?" Vera asked, straightening my lapel like a boxing coach preparing a fighter. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Remember, you're not defending what you did. You're explaining why it was necessary." The crowd was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 200 people, including faces I recognized from high school, neighbors I'd grown up with, and plenty of strangers who'd driven in from surrounding counties. I spotted my brothers near the back, standing apart from everyone else like they were at a funeral. Caroline appeared at my elbow with her 17-year-old son Braden in tow. He was tall and lanky, all elbows and enthusiasm, carrying a portfolio under his arm. "Aunt Riley." He'd been calling me that since he was 5, even though I wasn't technically his aunt. "Mom told me about the Entrepreneurship Center. I brought some sketches." "Braden's been accepted to the state architecture program," Caroline said proudly. "He wants to specialize in sustainable community design." "Just like you taught me," Braden said, grinning. "Remember when you showed me how to design that treehouse with proper load-bearing supports?" I did remember. He'd been 12, obsessed with building things, and I'd spent a whole weekend teaching him about structural engineering, using Lincoln logs and popsicle sticks. Mayor Lucas tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grand opening of Millfield Commons, our county's first sustainable micro-housing development." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "This project represents the future of rural development, environmentally responsible, economically viable, and community-focused. I'd like to introduce the visionary behind this project, Ms. Vera Mann." Vera stepped up to the microphone with confidence. "Thank you, Mayor Lucas. This development exists because one woman had the courage to see possibilities instead of just problems. Riley Fletcher, would you join me?" My heart was pounding as I walked to the microphone. I could see my brothers' faces in the crowd. Harrison looked nervous. Uriah looked angry. "6 months ago," I began, "my brothers told me I was too emotional to handle our family farm. They said I should let the men handle things." A murmur went through the crowd. They weren't entirely wrong. I am emotional. I'm emotionally invested in seeing rural communities thrive instead of just survive. I'm emotionally committed to making sure women's voices are heard in business decisions. And I'm emotionally driven to prove that caring about something doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful. The murmur was getting louder. I could see people nodding. This development isn't just about housing. It's about creating opportunities. The rail line will bring jobs. The increased tax revenue will improve schools and infrastructure. And next year we'll break ground on the Fletcher Women's Entrepreneurship Center. That got a real reaction. Applause, some cheers, and I could see Uriah's face turning red. I'm personally contributing $500,000 to establish this center, and I'm proud to announce that Braden Sullivan will be our inaugural youth architect mentee, helping design spaces where the next generation of rural entrepreneurs can build their dreams. Braden's face lit up like Christmas morning. Caroline was crying happy tears. Some of you think I betrayed my family's legacy. I think I honored it. My great-grandmother wanted to plant apple orchards. My grandmother wanted to raise sheep. My mother wanted to start a farm stand. All of them were told their ideas weren't practical. I looked directly at my brothers. Well, this is what happens when you stop telling women their ideas aren't practical and start listening to what they have to say. The applause was loud now, sustained. I could see women in the crowd clapping enthusiastically, some wiping away tears. You always said I wasn't a farmer, I continued, my voice carrying over the crowd. You were right. I'm something bigger. That's when Uriah lost it. This is bullshit, he shouted, pushing through the crowd toward the microphone. You destroyed our family's farm for a publicity stunt. The cameras immediately swung toward him. This was going to be on the evening news. You sold out 4 generations of hard work for money, he continued, his face purple with rage. You don't care about this community. You don't care about tradition. You don't care about anything except making yourself look good. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the reporters looked uncomfortable. I stepped back to the microphone, calm as still water. You're right about one thing, Uriah. I don't care about tradition when tradition means silencing half the population. I care about progress. I care about giving women opportunities. And I care about proving that emotional intelligence is a strength, not a weakness. I turned away from the microphone and walked toward the ribbon, scissors in hand. The cameras followed me, flashing as I cut through the red ribbon with one clean snip. Behind me, I could hear Uriah still shouting, but his voice was getting farther away. I was walking forward now, into the green plaza where children would play and families would build new lives. I didn't look back. The Fletcher Women's Entrepreneurship Center opened on a crisp October morning, built where the old chicken coop used to stand. Braden had designed it perfectly, modern glass and steel that somehow felt like it belonged among the oak trees, with solar panels that caught the morning light like mirrors. I was standing in the main conference room, watching 3 women pitch their business ideas to a panel of investors when Caroline found me. The coffee truck outside is doing amazing business, she said. Sarah's already talking about expanding to 3 more locations. Sarah was one of our first success stories. A single mom who'd started roasting coffee beans in her kitchen and now employed 6 people. And the daycare center? Booked solid through next year. Turns out rural working parents really needed quality childcare options. Through the window, I could see kids playing in the courtyard while their mothers attended workshops inside. The sight still made me smile. Riley? A young woman approached us hesitantly. I'm Jessica from the organic farm. We talked on the phone after the ribbon cutting. Of course. How's the farmers market expansion going? Better than I dreamed. I wanted to thank you again. My husband finally admitted I was right about direct sales. We're making 3 times what we used to. She walked away beaming, and Caroline nudged me. You know you've changed this whole county, right? We've changed it. This was never just about me. My phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. Can we talk? I'm outside. I found him sitting on one of the benches Braden had designed, staring at the building. He looked older than his 41 years, but calmer than I'd seen him since Dad's funeral. Nice place, he said when I sat down beside him. Braden did good work. He did. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Riley, I need to tell you something. We sold the farm. I wasn't surprised, but it still hit me harder than I expected. To who? 3 different buyers. The north pasture went to the Johnsons. They're expanding their apple orchard. The south fields went to a young couple from the city who want to try sustainable farming. And the house and barn went to a family with kids who needed more space. What about you and Uriah? I'm working for the county now. Road maintenance crew. It's honest work and I can pay my bills. He paused. Uriah moved to his wife's family farm 2 counties over. He's still angry. At me? At everything. At you, at himself, at Dad for dying, at the world for changing. Harrison looked at me. But mostly at himself, I think. He knows we screwed up. We sat in comfortable silence, watching a group of women walk into the building carrying laptops and coffee cups. I got your email, I said finally. He'd sent it 3 weeks ago. Just 2 lines. Thank you for trying to save the farm, even when we wouldn't listen. I'm sorry we made you choose between family and being heard. I meant every word. I know you did. Do you think Dad would be proud of what you built here? I considered the question seriously. I think he'd be proud that I didn't give up, that I found a way to honor the land without letting it trap me. Harrison nodded. He always said you were the smartest one in the family. He said that? All the time. Usually right after Uriah and I did something stupid. Harrison smiled sadly. He used to say you got your mother's heart and his stubborn streak, and that combination would either save the world or burn it down. Which do you think it was? Little of both, maybe. A car pulled up, and Vera got out carrying a bottle of champagne. Perfect timing, she called out. The documentary crew just confirmed. They want to feature the center in their film about rural innovation. What documentary? Harrison asked. Some filmmaker heard about Riley's story and decided it was worth telling. They've been following the project for months. Harrison looked at me with something like awe. You're going to be famous. I'm going to be useful, I corrected. There's a difference. Vera joined us on the bench. The mayor wants to discuss expanding the program to other counties. Apparently, 3 neighboring towns have inquired about starting their own women's entrepreneurship centers. Franchising feminism, Caroline said, appearing with Braden in tow. I love it. Braden was practically bouncing with excitement. Aunt Riley, they want me to design the next center, and the one after that. I'm going to specialize in community spaces that empower women. Just remember, I told him, the best buildings don't just house dreams, they help them grow. As the sun set over the center, I pulled out my phone and opened a new email. The recipient was Dad's old email address, which I knew would bounce back, but I needed to write it anyway. Dad. I didn't ruin the land like Uriah said I would. I didn't abandon our family's legacy like Harrison feared I might. I just finally made it mine. The East Field where you taught me to drive the tractor now has 12 families building new lives. The chicken coop where I collected eggs every morning is now a place where women learn to build businesses. The barn where you stored hay is now a conference center where people make deals and chase dreams. You once told me to pull weeds before they choke the roots. I just took longer to recognize what weeds look like. The land finally listens to me, Dad, even if they never did. Love. Riley. I hit send, knowing it would bounce back with an error message, but sometimes you have to say things out loud, even if no one's listening, especially if no one's listening. The center's lights were still on, women inside planning and dreaming and building something new. Tomorrow, more would come. And the day after that, even more. I'd turned my inheritance into something bigger than any of us had imagined. Not just money, not just buildings, but possibility itself. And that felt like the best revenge of all.
My name is Callista Davenport, and 5 minutes ago, my phone yanked me out of a quiet afternoon and back into a life I've spent years rebuilding. I was rinsing paintbrushes in the stainless steel sink at the community studio, the room smelling of linseed and lemon cleaner, when the screen lit with a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Vivian? Her voice was polished and cool, a heel clicking across marble. Callista! I thought you should know. Grandma Ruth passed this morning. The service will be at the house. You'll make it, I assume? The brush slid from my fingers and clattered in the basin. For a breath, I watched color bleed down the drain. Ultramarine, then crimson, like wringing a sky into a sink. "I'll be there," I said, and heard how even it sounded, like a door closing on its hinges. "That's good." A pause, soft as a smirk. "It'll be family." The line went dead. The studio hummed on, a heater ticking, a child somewhere laughing, a streetcar whining past the window. My hands shook water onto the floor. Vivian was still the sister who could turn any room into a stage where I was the extra. The sister who smiled through my dress fitting, then left with my fiancé the next week. I dried my palms on a shop towel until the fabric rasped. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call anyone, not yet. I stood there and let the ache rise and settle like a tide. And then I found my keys. I am not going back for Vivian. Not anymore. I'm going because Ruth taught me truth is a kind of keeping. The house will be full, and every picture on those walls will have something to say. I'm ready to hear it, and to answer. The drive back to Brookhaven felt longer than the miles on the map. Daniel had insisted on coming, his hand steady on the wheel, though he said little. Beside him in the back seat, Lily hummed to herself while sketching in her pad, legs swinging just short of the floor. I kept my eyes on the horizon, where the highway cut through fields of brittle corn and empty barns, the late October sky holding the first thread of frost. "I can still book you a flight home tomorrow if this feels like too much," Daniel said at one point, his voice careful, like he was placing words on glass. "I'll stay," I answered. "I have to, for Ruth." The name settled in the car with weight. Daniel nodded and turned back to the road. By the time we reached the town line, memories pressed from every direction. The diner where Ruth took me for pie after school plays, the hardware store where my father barked at me for buying the wrong nails, and finally, the wrought iron gate at the end of Cedar Hill Road. I hadn't seen it in 8 years, yet the rust spots sat in the same corners, like time had obeyed Vivian's will to keep everything perfectly staged. The house rose beyond the gate, white clapboard and black shutters, the porch sagging just enough to betray age beneath its polish. My chest tightened. Daniel reached for my hand across the console. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm here, aren't I?" I pushed the door open before doubt could catch hold. The gravel crunched under my shoes as we walked to the porch. The air smelled of cedar smoke and something sweeter. Lavender sachets. Vivian's favorite touch. She always made sure the house smelled curated, as if grief and dust could be masked with perfume. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood framed in the light, her hair silvered since I'd last seen her. She blinked, startled, then pressed me into a hug too tight, too long, as if a decade of silence could be patched with a squeeze. "It's good to see you, Callista," she whispered. I caught Daniel's eye over her shoulder. His mouth lifted in a half-smile, one meant for me alone. Breathe. Inside, the hallway spread like a museum of comparison. Childhood photos in neat rows, Vivian's certificates perfectly matted and centered. Mine hung lower, almost apologetic. Each frame was a reminder of the old hierarchy that had defined our lives. From the living room came the low murmur of voices, then a sharper one, familiar and poised. "Vivian." I braced myself, smoothing my sweater though my hands trembled. Crossing that threshold was like stepping into a play already rehearsed without me. Relatives in muted suits turned, polite smiles flickering. And there, standing with a glass of white wine, poised as if for a toast, was Vivian. Her eyes found mine instantly. Her smile was precise, practiced. "Callista," she said, like greeting an acquaintance, not a sister. I steadied my breath. "Oh, I'm here for Grandma Ruth." The room went still, and I knew the real service hadn't even begun. The living room was fuller than I expected, a current of muted conversation moving beneath the dim chandelier. Cousins I hadn't seen since high school shifted in their seats. Uncles nodded in polite acknowledgement, and my father looked up from the sofa only long enough to say my name as if it were a footnote. Callista flat, neutral, no warmth. "Dad!" The word caught in my throat, but I kept my face still. Daniel rested a hand against the small of my back, subtle support in the crowd. Lily pressed close to my leg, clutching her sketch pad like a shield. Across the room, Vivian moved with the elegance of someone born to be observed. Her black dress hugged her frame, pearls catching the low light, hair swept back, as though a stylist had been part of her morning ritual. Even in grief she sparkled. Especially in grief. "I'm glad you could make it," she said, voice carrying just enough for the nearest relatives to hear. "For Grandma Ruth." "Of course." I sat down, ignoring the chair she gestured to beside her. Instead, I chose a spot near the window where I could see the portrait of Ruth over the mantel. Her eyes, painted soft and kind, met mine across the space, anchoring me. From the corner of my vision, I caught the movement of someone standing near the drapes. He was older, shoulders slumped in a suit that seemed a size too big, hair thinning where once it had been thick. When his gaze finally lifted, the years dropped away and I saw Nathan. The air snagged in my chest. He looked weathered, tired, nothing like the man who once promised me forever and then left to follow Vivian's glow. He didn't step closer, didn't say my name, just dipped his head in the faintest of acknowledgments. My stomach twisted, and I turned back to the fireplace, refusing to give him the stage he might have wanted. The pastor called everyone to quiet for the evening service. Chairs had been arranged in rows, the scent of lavender polish heavy in the air. People bowed their heads as prayers were offered, but my thoughts wandered. Back to evenings in Ruth's kitchen, the way she hummed hymns while kneading bread, her hand squeezing mine when silence at family dinners grew too sharp. When it came time for family to share memories, Vivian was first to rise. She glided to the front, fingertips brushing the edge of the podium, as though it were her rightful place. "Grandma Ruth was the heart of this family," she began, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "She taught us to be strong, to reach for more, to never settle. I wouldn't be who I am today without her constant belief in me." Nods circled the room. I clenched my hands together, nails pressing crescents into my palms. She was lying, rewriting history, as if the woman who tucked me into bed every night and listened to my fears had belonged solely to her. Vivian paused for effect, eyes glassy but calculated. "She always told me I was destined for greater things." The words sliced through me. Ruth had never spoken them to me, though she had been the only one who made me feel enough. I felt Daniel's gaze from across the room. My pulse beat in my ears. When Vivian returned to her seat, a hush followed, and before doubt could smother me, I stood. "I'd like to say something," I heard myself declare, voice steadier than I felt. Every head turned, and suddenly the air was mine. The pastor nodded for me to step forward. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced them steady, crossing the room until the scent of polished wood and candle wax surrounded me. The podium felt colder than I expected beneath my fingertips. "Grandma Ruth," I began, my voice carrying through the silence, was the first person in this family who saw me for who I was, not for what I could prove, not for who I stood beside, but simply me. Murmurs flickered through the room. My father shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing, my mother's hands clasped tighter in her lap. "She taught me that love isn't loud. It doesn't need a spotlight. It's in the quiet gestures, sitting with you through hard nights, remembering the small things you thought no one noticed. She wasn't about appearances. She was about truth." I glanced toward the portrait above the mantel. Ruth's gaze calm, unwavering. A swell of memory rose, her calloused hand covering mine as I sobbed after Vivian's betrayal, her whisper in my ear. "You will survive this. You will grow stronger than they can imagine." "She didn't play favorites," I continued, though some of us might have believed otherwise. My eyes landed briefly on Vivian. Her jaw tightened, her fingers twisting the stem of her wineglass. She gave her love carefully, but when she gave it, it was steady and real. That is the legacy she leaves me. Not trophies, not a stage, but a reminder that being kind, being honest, matters more than being perfect. When I stepped back, the silence stretched long enough for me to hear the crackle of the fire. It wasn't the applause Vivian had drawn with her polished speech, but it was heavier, more solid. People shifted, unsure, but I could feel something had cracked open. I returned to my seat beside Daniel. He slipped his hand over mine, his thumb brushing circles into my skin. Lily leaned her head against my arm, sketchpad balanced on her knees, as though she too sensed the weight of the moment. Vivian's smile returned, brittle at the edges. as the pastor gently redirected the service, but I saw the storm behind her eyes. Later, when guests began drifting toward the dining room for casseroles and coffee, she found me in the hallway near the old coat rack. Her heels clicked like punctuation against the wood floor. "You didn't need to make that little speech," she murmured, low enough that no one else would hear. I met her stare evenly. "It wasn't for you." Her lips curved, but the sweetness was venom. "You still think you're the better one?" I leaned closer, my voice quiet but firm. "No, I just don't have to lie to be loved." A shadow passed her face. For a breath, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she whispered, "You have no idea what you've walked into." Then she turned, the sway of her dress sharp, her silhouette swallowed by the glow of the chandelier. I stood frozen, her words echoing, and for the first time that night, a chill threaded down my spine. Something was waiting, and it wasn't grief. I barely slept that night. The guest room still smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender, but it wasn't enough to soften the way the walls pressed in, heavy with old arguments. Every creak of the house felt like Ruth trying to speak through the floorboards, urging me to stay alert. Vivian's warning looped in my mind. "You have no idea what you've walked into." By morning, my nerves felt scraped raw. I padded downstairs in search of coffee, hoping the ritual might steady me. The kitchen looked the same as when I was a teenager. The oak cabinets, the chipped tile counter Ruth used to cover with pie crusts. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Then I saw him. Nathan sat hunched at the table, a mug of black coffee between his hands, shoulders sagging. He looked up slowly, eyes hollow, and whispered, "Callista, hi." I froze, fingers tightening around the mug I had pulled from the shelf. My voice came out flat. "Didn't expect to see you either." Silence spread between us, filled only by the drip of the coffee pot. Finally, he spoke again. Words weighted with something that almost resembled regret. "I'm sorry. For everything." I set the mug down harder than I meant to, porcelain clicking against the counter. "Now you're sorry? After 8 years?" His gaze dropped. "I was stupid, weak." Vivian. She knew how to pull me in. I thought I was gaining the world, but she drained me. "We're divorced now. She kicked me out a year ago." A bitter laugh escaped me. "So the fairy tale didn't last." "No," he said, shaking his head. "She's broke, Callista. Everything online is smoke and mirrors. The clothes, the trips, it's all debt. And she's here because she needs what Ruth left behind." The words hit like a strike of ice water. "What do you mean?" "I overheard her talking to a lawyer. She's trying to contest the will. But your name is in it. Ruth left something for you. Something Vivian doesn't want you to know about." My heart thudded, each beat louder than the last. Pieces slid into place. The call, the smile, the warning. Vivian hadn't just wanted me rattled. She wanted me blind. I straightened, spine stiff as iron. For the first time in years, I felt a pulse of resolve. I wasn't going to let her take Ruth from me again. That afternoon, I drove into town. The sky a heavy slate over the courthouse square. Elaine Morris's office sat above a bakery, the smell of yeast and sugar seeping up the stairwell. I hadn't made an appointment, but when the receptionist saw my face, she simply gestured to a chair and whispered, "She'll want to see you." Minutes later, Elaine appeared, her gray hair pulled into a neat twist, glasses low on her nose. She greeted me with a knowing look, as if Ruth herself had left instructions. "Callista Davenport," she said softly. "I was wondering when you'd come." Inside her office, lined with books whose spines had softened with years of use, she opened a drawer and drew out a cream envelope. My name curved across it in Ruth's handwriting, steady and elegant. My throat tightened before I even touched it. "Read it," Elaine urged. My hands trembled as I slid the letter free. "My dearest Callista, if you are reading this, then I have gone. I know life in this family has not been easy for you, but I saw you. The way you carried pain with grace, the way you still gave kindness when it wasn't returned. I am proud of you. I want you to have a place that is yours, free of shadows. I leave you my lake house and a trust for Lily's future. Build something honest there." Tears blurred the ink. I folded the page carefully, pressing it to my chest. Elaine's voice broke the silence. She wanted it airtight. Handwriting samples, medical evaluations, even video records. Vivian can challenge, but she will not win unless you let her. A warmth surged in me, not of triumph, but of belonging. Ruth had believed in me enough to protect me even now. I won't back down, I said, my voice clear. Elaine nodded. I didn't think you would. When I stepped back into the cool evening air, leaves skittering across the pavement, I felt it fully for the first time. Strength. And Vivian was about to see it. The house buzzed with the hum of conversation when I returned. Vivian was holding court at the dining table, her laugh pitched high, rehearsed for an audience of aunts and cousins. I didn't pause. I walked straight across the room, every step fueled by Ruth's letter burning in my bag. We need to talk, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Vivian's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked, calculating. Not now. Callista, we have company. Now, I repeated. A murmur rippled through the room. She set her glass down, stood slowly, and followed me out onto the porch, where the autumn air bit cold against our faces. You went to see Elaine, she said before I could speak. Yes, and I know about the lake house, the trust, and the letter. Ruth left them to me. Her lips curled. Of course she did. The pity prize. That house should have been mine. I spent more summers there than you ever did. She didn't leave it to the one who camped on the couch. She left it to the one who never used her. Her mask slipped, fury flashing across her face. You don't deserve it. You never have. Weak little Callista, clinging to your boring family and your sad little art classes, pretending you're better than us. I stepped closer. No, I just stopped needing your approval. That's what you can't stand. For the first time, her poise cracked. Silence hung sharp between us, and I knew the war had only just begun. By the next morning, the cracks in Vivian's perfect veneer spread fast. Cousins whispered about debts. Aunts exchanged screenshots of her staged photos. And one by one, the admiration drained from their faces. She vanished from the dining room before noon, leaving only silence in her wake. I didn't feel joy in her unraveling, only relief. For once, the truth stood taller than her lies. That evening, my mother found me on the porch, hands twisting together. I should have defended you, she admitted, voice breaking. I let your father's pride and Vivian's shine blind me. I'm sorry. I held her gaze, steady. Thank you. That means more than you know. Weeks later, Daniel and I opened the doors of Ruth's lake house, now filled with Lily's laughter and canvases leaning against every wall. I named the community project there Ruth's Circle, a place for daughters and mothers to paint, speak, and heal. Looking out over the water, I understood her gift. My true inheritance wasn't the house. It was the courage to choose peace and to build something honest from the ruins of betrayal. My name is Solange Merritt, and I can still feel the cold bite of that water clinging to my skin the moment my father's hands shoved me into the hotel fountain. It happened so quickly that for a second I thought maybe I had imagined it. The gasps, then the cruel ripple of laughter around the courtyard, told me otherwise. My emerald dress clung to me like a net. Mascara stung my eyes, and my sister Elena's wedding photographer raised his camera as if humiliation were a detail worth, capturing forever. I stood up, dripping, heart pounding but strangely steady. My father's triumphant smirk cut through the laughter like a knife. My mother's jeweled hand hovered near her mouth, hiding a smile she couldn't quite suppress. Elena looked radiant in her gown, her eyes lit not with sympathy, but with delight. For 32 years, I had been the family's scapegoat, the easy target for their disdain, the shadow trailing behind their golden child. And here, in front of 200 guests and a wall of white roses, they had turned my pain into entertainment. I should have crumbled. That's what they expected. What they had trained me to do since childhood. Lower my eyes. Swallow my words. Let them define me. But something inside me had shifted the moment I hit that water. Maybe it was the weight of decades breaking free. Maybe it was the knowledge that they had no idea who I truly was, what I had built, or who waited just beyond those gilded doors. I pushed my soaked hair back, straightened my shoulders, and looked directly at my father. My voice was calm, deliberate, carrying over the courtyard. "Remember this moment," I said, and I smiled, because I already knew what was coming next. Growing up in the Merritt household was like living under a spotlight that never once turned in my direction. Our estate in Greenwich looked perfect from the outside. White columns, manicured hedges, the kind of house that belonged on a magazine cover. Inside, though, it was a stage built for Elena. She was 3 years younger, with a laugh that made adults melt, and a natural grace my mother loved to parade at every gala. From the time we could walk, it was clear which one of us was meant to shine. "Solange, stop slouching! No one will ever take you seriously if you can't hold yourself upright." My mother's voice still echoes in my memory, sharp and clipped, while her hand rested tenderly on Elena's shoulder. My father, Charles, didn't waste words. His disappointment lived in the raise of an eyebrow, the turn of his head toward Elena. Whenever I tried to share an achievement, I learned early that birthdays weren't about me. On my 16th, I sat at the long mahogany table, cake waiting in the kitchen, hope clinging to me like a fragile ribbon. I thought maybe this time he'd toast me. Instead, Charles lifted his glass and announced Elena's acceptance into a summer program in Paris. The table erupted in applause for her. My cake never left the refrigerator. I remember sitting there, hands folded tightly in my lap, cheeks burning, pretending not to care. At school, I buried myself in books. Straight A's, honor roll, debate team captain. Each ribbon or certificate slipped quietly into a drawer in my room. Unseen, unmentioned. Elena's ballet recitals drew the whole family 3 states away. My debate finals were attended by no one. It wasn't the absence that hurt the most, but the stories they made up later. "We're so proud of how supportive you are of your sister," my mother would say, as if my silence were a choice, not a wound. The message was relentless. No matter how hard I worked, I would always fall short of Elena's light. I began to wonder if invisibility was my fate, if maybe I was meant to be the family's background character. But even then, under all that hurt, something stubborn kept burning. A quiet defiance. If they wouldn't see me, then I would carve out a life so vast, so undeniable, that their blindness would be their burden, not mine. That thought became my anchor. I stopped telling them about my grades, my awards, my plans. Their approval was no longer the currency I sought. Yet the emptiness they left behind hardened into a vow I carried with me. One day, I promised myself, I would step out from the shadows they shoved me into. And when that day came, they wouldn't recognize me at all. College was my first taste of freedom. When I moved into a cramped dorm at Columbia, I promised myself I would never again beg for my parents' attention. While Elena was twirling her way through elite conservatories and glossy magazine spreads, I was buried in intelligence studies, political science, and computer forensics. Most nights, I fell asleep with textbooks sprawled across my bed, the hum of the city outside my window reminding me that the world was bigger than the Merritt household. The National Security Agency wasn't looking for ordinary recruits. They were searching for people who could see patterns no one else could. I fit. My professors had noticed it first, how I could connect threads across cases, catch anomalies in data that others overlooked. One of them recommended me for a competitive program, and before long, I found myself inside Fort Meade, sitting in a sterile room, staring at encrypted chatter from overseas. The first breakthrough came late one night. Everyone else had given up on a string of scrambled messages that looked meaningless. I spotted a rhythm hidden in the chaos, an old code pattern buried inside modern encryption. Within hours, the team realized the chatter was part of a plot targeting a U.S. consulate. We intervened in time. Lives were saved. After that, doors opened quickly. Training in counterintelligence followed, then field rotations, then leadership roles. I was young, yes, but I was also relentless. The kind of analyst who refused to blink until every piece of the puzzle fit. That persistence earned me respect I had never once felt at home. My colleagues didn't see the other daughter. They saw results. By 29, I was leading operations no one outside the agency would ever hear about. Disrupting foreign interference, shutting down cyber plots before they reached American soil. Every mission carried risk. Every mistake could cost lives. But I thrived in that crucible. For the first time, my life had meaning not because of someone else's applause, but because I knew the weight of what I was doing. My family, of course, knew nothing. At holidays, when I bothered to attend, they asked casual questions laced with condescension. "Still pushing papers for the government?" My uncle would chuckle. "You know those jobs don't pay enough to land you a decent husband." I smiled politely and changed the subject, never letting them glimpse the classified files that haunted my nights or the teams I quietly commanded. In truth, secrecy became a shield. If they believed I was ordinary, that was fine. It kept what mattered safe from their ridicule. But inside, the gulf widened. I no longer hoped for recognition. I no longer waited for them to turn toward me. My life was mine, and the satisfaction I drew from it was something they could never take away. Yet even with all the triumphs, I felt the hollow echo of solitude. Success was powerful, but it didn't silence the ache of being unseen. I had built walls high enough to keep my family out, but those same walls kept me alone, too. It wasn't until I crossed paths with a man who saw past the walls entirely that I realized how much I had been missing. And that meeting would change everything. It happened at a cybersecurity summit in Geneva, a gathering where world leaders, defense contractors, and tech visionaries mingled under the guise of panel discussions and polished hors d'oeuvres. I was there on assignment, representing the agency, listening for the things people didn't say out loud. The room glittered with confidence and money, yet I felt invisible, the same way I always had at family dinners. Until I noticed him. Adrian Cross wasn't the kind of man you overlooked. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy stillness that drew attention without demanding it. He carried himself like someone used to being in control. I knew his name before we spoke. Anyone in the field did. CrossShield Global had gone from a college dorm project to a multi-billion-dollar empire protecting governments and corporations from threats no firewall could handle. He wasn't just another tech CEO. He was the man agencies like mine trusted when stakes were too high to gamble. Our conversation started in line for coffee. He glanced at the badge clipped to my blazer and said, "You don't look like someone who files reports." I nearly laughed. It was the kind of dismissive assumption I'd heard my whole life, but his eyes were sharp, curious, not mocking. I told him I preferred finding patterns in chaos, and he leaned in, intrigued. One exchange turned into an hour into dinner, and by the end of the night, I realized he had looked at me, really looked at me, in a way no one in my family ever had. Over the next months, our paths crossed deliberately. He flew to day, sea, under the pretense of meetings. I found myself extending trips to align with his schedule. We lived in the shadows of classified briefings and corporate negotiations, yet inside those shadows, we built something incandescent. He didn't care about the merit name or the hollow prestige of my family. He cared about me, my mind, my fire, my relentless drive. 18 months later, we married quietly on the Amalfi Coast. No grand guest list, no photographers, just two witnesses who knew the value of secrecy. For me, it wasn't only about security. It was about keeping something precious safe from the people most likely to tarnish it. For 3 years, Adrian and I lived parallel to the world's spotlight, a fortress of our own making. And then the invitation arrived. The one embossed in gold with Elena's name at the top. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope sealed with gold foil. Elena and Preston Hale cordially invited me to the wedding of the year. Or at least that's how the script read. My fingers lingered on the embossed letters longer than I wanted them to. It wasn't the event itself that twisted my stomach into knots. It was the certainty that stepping into that ballroom meant stepping back into the role my family had written for me decades ago. The afterthought. The disappointment. The one they could safely ignore. Adrian noticed my hesitation when I placed the envelope on the counter. "We don't have to go," he said, his tone steady but protective. You owe them nothing! I know, I replied, forcing a smile. But sometimes you go not because you owe them, but because you owe yourself the truth. On the day of the wedding, New York shimmered with early autumn sunlight as I pulled my car up to the Waldorf Astoria. The grand hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and cascades of orchids. Guests in gowns and tuxedos flooded the lobby, their laughter bouncing off marble walls. I smoothed the emerald silk of my dress, adjusted the small diamond studs Adrian had given me, and stepped inside alone. The usher looked down his list with a faint crease between his brows before leading me to table 22. So far back, it might as well have been the coat check. I had known it would be like this, but the sting still found its mark. A cousin leaned across the table as I sat down. Oh, Solange, you came by yourself? That's brave. Her smile was dripping with false sympathy. I gave her nothing in return. No explanation, no defense. Another relative chimed in, voice just loud enough to carry. I heard she had a professor who broke her heart, left her for a student. Terrible scandal. I looked her in the eye and said calmly, You must be confusing me with someone else. Then I sipped my water, refusing to take the bait. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Elena swept into the ballroom on Preston's arm, in a gown so ornate it required attendants to carry. The train. My father's chest swelled with pride, as if he himself were the groom. My mother flitted from table to table, ensuring every guest admired Elena properly. When the speeches began, my name was a ghost. The maid of honor called Elena the sister I never had. The best man praised Preston for joining a dynasty of excellence. I watched from my distant table, invisible but painfully present, each word another reminder of my permanent exclusion. By the time the dancing started, my phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. Landing soon. 15 minutes. Relief washed over me, though I kept it hidden behind a neutral expression. I tried to join a circle of cousins on the dance floor, only to see them subtly tighten formation, their laughter rising as if to drown me out. I stepped back into the shadows, spine straight, pulse steady. They still thought I was alone. They still thought I was powerless. And they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I had just stepped toward the terrace, craving air more than champagne, when my father's voice boomed through the microphone. Leaving so soon. Solange? His words carried over the crowd, pulling every eye to me. I froze, not from fear, but from the familiar weight of his scrutiny. Just a breath of fresh air, I replied evenly. Running away. More like it, he countered, the microphone amplifying every syllable. Laughter rippled through the tables. He didn't stop there. 32 years old, no husband, no prospects. Meanwhile, Elena has secured the most eligible match in New York. The ballroom vibrated with uneasy chuckles. My mother's lips twitched into something like satisfaction. Elena's smile glimmered, as if she had won yet another unspoken contest. I lifted my chin. This isn't the place. Dad? It's exactly the place, he thundered, striding closer, his voice taking on that courtroom cadence he wielded like a weapon. A family built on success deserves to celebrate it. But you wouldn't know about that. Would you? Solange? Always jealous. Always a disappointment. Gasps spread through the room. His eyes burned into mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boyish pride he reserved only for Elena. Then it vanished, replaced by something darker. He shoved me hard, before I could register his intent. The world tilted. Cold engulfed me as I plunged into the fountain. My breath caught, silk and water clinging like chains. For one suspended second, I thought I might shatter. Then I pushed myself up, hair plastered to my face, mascara streaking, dress ruined. The laughter came in waves, some sharp, some nervous, some cruel. I found my father's smirk, my mother's hand failing to hide a grin, Elna's wide-eyed delight. And in that moment, something snapped. Not with rage, but with clarity. I stood tall in the water, shoulders squared, and said calmly, "Remember this moment?" The room stilled. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was demanding it. The laughter hadn't fully died down when the first ripple of confusion swept through the ballroom. Outside, engines rumbled to a stop, followed by the distinct slam of multiple car doors. Guests turned their heads as the massive double doors opened with a measured authority. Two men in tailored black suits stepped in first, earpieces glinting beneath the chandeliers. They didn't look like hotel staff. They moved like soldiers, scanning exits, corners, and faces with professional precision. Conversations faltered, music thinned. Even my father, still gripping the microphone, stiffened at the disruption. "Excuse me," he blustered, puffing up his chest. "This is a private event." Neither man acknowledged him. One pressed a finger to his earpiece and spoke quietly. "Perimeter secure. Proceed!" And then Adrian entered. He filled the doorway as if he had been carved to belong there. 6'2", dark hair windswept from the rotor wash of a helicopter, his Tom Ford suit cutting clean lines against the gold-lit hall. His eyes found me instantly, sharp, ocean deep, softening only when they locked on mine. That private smile, the one reserved for me alone, curved at his mouth. The crowd parted without being asked. Whispers rippled. "Who is he? Is this security? Why are they here?" I stood dripping by the fountain's edge, ruined dress clinging. And yet when Adrian crossed the room, I felt no shame, only a steadying weight, as if his very presence wrapped me in armor. He reached me, took my hands, soaked, trembling, still clenched, and kissed my knuckles gently. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice low, steady. "You're right on time," I answered. For the first time that night, my voice didn't shake. Gasps circled us as Adrian turned, one arm slipping protectively around my back. "I'm Adrian Cross," he said evenly, eyes cutting toward my parents. "Solange's husband." The silence that followed was thunderous. My mother's face drained, her practiced smile faltering into disbelief. My father's jaw unhinged, words dying in his throat. Elena froze mid-step, her bridal glow cracking into raw shock. Around us, phones were already out, whispers rising. But the biggest blow hadn't landed yet, because Adrian wasn't the only one who had come. The ballroom fractured the instant my colleagues addressed me as Deputy Director Merritt. The title echoed against marble walls, carrying more weight than years of insults ever had. My father's lips parted, but no words came. My mother swayed, clutching the back of a chair. Elena's perfect smile collapsed into disbelief. For once, silence belonged to me. I didn't wait for apologies. With Adrian's arm firm around my back and my team closing ranks, I moved toward the exit. My father's voice finally rose behind me, trembling, claiming they had always wanted what was best. The lie tasted bitter in the air, but it no longer had power. The night outside was sharp and clean, the thrum of helicopter blades overhead promising escape. Adrian bent close, his voice warm even against the roar. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, steady and sure. "For the first time, I really am." Because freedom wasn't in their approval. It was in walking away unchained. They had mocked me, diminished me, tried to drown me in shame, but I had built a life beyond their reach. Family isn't who shares your name. Family is who stands with you when the ground shakes. And that night, rising above the city lights, I knew exactly who mine was. The music had barely settled when her voice cut through the air like a blade. "You don't belong here. Leave!" For a moment, the room held its breath. I stood in the middle of the grand ballroom, the chandeliers above me burning too bright, every pair of eyes fixed on the woman who had just tried to erase me from my own son's wedding. Her gown shimmered in ivory, her smile sharp with triumph, and she thought she had won. My name is Evangeline Hart, and I have never been fond of scenes. But there are moments in life when silence feels like surrender. And I wasn't about to surrender, not to her. I could have turned away, swallowed the humiliation, and let the whispers follow me out the door. Instead, I smoothed the skirt of my black dress, straightened the silver pendant at my throat, and lifted my chin. "If that's what you want, I'll leave," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled against the clutch I carried. Then I stepped aside, making room for the figure who had been waiting in the shadows. When he entered, a ripple moved through the guests. Chairs creaked, whispers rose, and in the far corner, someone stifled a gasp. The bride's face drained of color, her bouquet sliding in slow motion from her fingers to the polished floor. In that instant, the air shifted. The celebration, the promises, the delicate facade she had so carefully built, it all began to fracture, and I stood there, watching the first crack appear, knowing that everything I had endured these last few months was about to come crashing into the open. Because this wasn't just a wedding, it was a reckoning. 6 months earlier, the idea of a wedding had filled me with a kind of fragile joy I hadn't felt in years. Daniel had walked into my kitchen one Sunday morning, his face lit up like a boy's, and announced he was getting married. Clara, he said, was everything he had ever hoped for. She was thoughtful, graceful, devoted to her work. She wanted a future with him. For the first time since his father's passing, I saw light in his eyes again, and I couldn't bring myself to doubt him. Clara arrived at my house later that week, carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of lilies, as if she already belonged. She slipped into the chair across from me, spoke in that soft voice of hers, and told me her own parents weren't supportive. They thought Daniel wasn't good enough for her. Her eyes glistened when she said she'd chosen love over status, that she would rather start with nothing than betray her heart. Something inside me cracked at that confession. Perhaps it was because I, too, had once chosen love over approval, and I knew how much it cost. I told her she would have the wedding she had always dreamed of. She placed her hand on mine, as though I'd given her the world. From that day on, I became the architect of her dream. I wrote check after check, tapping into the life insurance money my husband had left me, then cashing in the small bonds we'd saved together. I visited Newport's old seaside estates, hunting for the perfect venue. I booked a mansion overlooking the cliffs, its ballroom painted in gold light and salt air, the kind of place brides wanted to be photographed walking down marble stairs. There were fittings for her gown, an ivory creation that seemed to glow under the seamstress's lamps. She looked at herself in the mirror with parted lips and misted eyes, and I felt proud that I was making this possible for her. When she fretted over shoes, I reminded her she deserved the best. When she claimed she wanted nothing more than to feel like family, I unclasped the silver pendant that had belonged to my grandmother and fastened it around her neck. She touched it as though it were a crown. Daniel worked long hours and left the planning to us. He smiled when I showed him the flower arrangements and shrugged when I asked about the menu. As long as Clara's happy, I'm happy, he said. And I let myself believe that was enough. Yet every time I looked at the calendar and counted the dwindling weeks, I felt a tug of unease. I silenced it with lists and invoices, with late nights calling caterers and florists. This was for my son, I reminded myself, for his future. And when the vendors called to confirm final payments, I gave them my personal number, telling them not to worry about a thing. I wanted every detail flawless, because I thought if Clara felt cherished, Daniel would be safe. I see now how blind I was. Back then, though, I thought I was building a wedding. In truth, I was laying the stage for a storm. The first sliver of doubt came one late evening in May. I had stopped by Daniel's townhouse to drop off a box of candles I had ordered for the reception. Tables! Clara was supposed to be working a night shift at the hospital, but her car was in the driveway, gleaming under the streetlight. I told myself she might have swapped shifts, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. I balanced the box against my hip as I unlocked the front door with the spare key Daniel had given me years ago. The living room was empty, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. As I climbed the stairs, a voice drifted down the hallway, Clara's voice, low and sharp in a way I had never heard before. No, not this number. I told you already. After the wedding, I'll have full access. Don't push me. I froze outside the bedroom door, my pulse beating in my ears. The box of candles pressed against my ribs felt heavier than stone. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, straining to catch every word. You'll get your cut, just like we agreed. He's already convinced. She's practically bankrolling this thing herself. By the time we're done, we'll be sitting on at least 200 grand. My stomach lurched. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself. The voice I had thought was filled with kindness now dripped with calculation. I wanted to burst through the door, to demand answers, but something in me held back. Instead, I tiptoed down the stairs, each step creaking too loud in the silence, and slipped out into the night, back in my car. I sat gripping the steering wheel, gasping for breath. The betrayal burned hot and cold all at once. Had Daniel heard this tone before? Did he notice the way her stories didn't quite line up? Or the way she paid cash for everything as though she had something to hide? I thought of the nights she claimed to be working late, of the times she avoided talking about her childhood, and suddenly every inconsistency came rushing back like jagged pieces of a puzzle I had ignored. For weeks after that night, I tried to convince myself I had misheard. Clara would greet me with her perfect smile, hugging me as though nothing were wrong. But when I looked closer, I saw the cracks. She never spoke about her coworkers at the hospital, and when I mentioned a local physician, I knew. She brushed it off with a vague nod. She claimed she was too old-fashioned for credit cards, yet her purse bulged with wads of cash. I tested her once, over coffee. I asked which town she had grown up in. She blinked, stirred her cup, and said, "Virginia." The next week, she told Daniel it had been North Carolina. Small details, but they lodged like splinters under my skin. At night, lying awake in the quiet of my own house, I replayed that phone call in my mind. The sharpness of her words, the promise of a payout, the casual cruelty of describing my devotion as nothing more than part of the scheme. I wanted to tell Daniel, to shake him until he saw what I saw, but when I hinted that maybe he and Clara were rushing, his face tightened. "Mom, please," he said. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." His trust in her was absolute, and I knew that if I pressed harder, I would only push him further away. So I stayed silent. But silence didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. I could no longer pretend it was just nerves. Something inside me shifted the night I sat in my kitchen, staring at my untouched cup of tea, replaying Clara's voice on that call. The words 200 grand rang in my ears like a curse. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I opened my laptop and typed, "Private Investigator, Newport, Rhode Island." The screen filled with names, most of them strangers, but one stood out. Detective Marla Harris, a retired police officer specializing in fraud cases. My hand trembled as I dialed her number, the way it had the first time I called the hospice for my husband years earlier. Some calls change everything. We met at a cafe tucked into a quiet corner near the harbor. Harris had a no-nonsense face, sharp gray eyes that seemed to see straight through my hesitation. I told her about Daniel, about Clara, about the night I overheard that phone call. She listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, her pen moving steadily across a small notebook. "Mrs. Hart," she said at last. "This has all the marks of a romance scam with a marriage twist. These people are professionals. They craft entire lives to fit what their target needs to see." Her words made me dizzy. I pressed my palms against the cool table, trying to anchor myself. "Can you prove it?" She didn't smile, didn't offer false comfort. If she's careless enough to use the same face, the same voice, then yes, I can prove it. 2 weeks later, Harris returned with a file so thick it felt like it carried the weight of my worst fears. Clara Weston was no nurse. Her real name was Sarah Weston, wanted in 3 states for fraud. She had a history of moving from city to city, creating false identities, charming her way into men's lives, then vanishing with their money. I clutched the folder to my chest, as though it might burn through my skin. The woman Daniel called his future was a practiced liar, and I was the only one who could see it. Walking back to my car, the file heavy in my arms, I knew I couldn't simply sit Daniel down and show him. He loved her too deeply, trusted her too blindly. Words alone would never break the spell. I needed something undeniable, something public. The file from Harris left me sleepless for nights. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing Clara's voice in my head, mocking me, mocking Daniel. Every instinct screamed to protect my son, but the truth was clear. He would never believe me on my word alone. He needed to see her mask crack, to watch it fall in front of everyone. When Harris mentioned a name buried in Clara's past, I seized on it like a lifeline. Victor Morales, former contractor in Florida, one-time partner in her schemes, until she cleaned out his bank account and left him with debts he Could never repay. Harris had traced him to Providence, working construction under the radar, still bitter, still searching. I called him from my kitchen, the receiver slippery in my damp hand. He answered with suspicion, his voice rough from years of anger. "Who's asking?" "My name is Evangeline Hart. You don't know me, but I believe you know a woman who once called herself Clara Weston." Silence stretched so long, thought he might hang up. Then came a sound I recognized all too well, the sharp inhale of someone reliving betrayal. "Where is she?" "She's marrying my son in 3 weeks," I said steadily, though my heart pounded. "And she's already drained me of more than $40,000. His laugh was hollow, bitter. "That's her. Takes everything, leaves nothing but ashes. What do you want from me?" I looked out the window at the sea beyond my yard, waves striking the rocks in endless rhythm. "I want her unmasked, in front of everyone, so there's no room for doubt." For the first time, there was something almost human in his tone. "You're asking me to crash a wedding." "I'm asking you to tell the truth," I corrected. By the end of the call, we had an understanding. He would come to Newport, stand in the doorway when I gave the signal, and hold up the pieces of her past she could never outrun. I hung up feeling both terrified and certain. Clara thought she was marrying into our family. What she didn't know was that I was building a stage for her downfall. The morning of the wedding broke gray and restless, the kind of sky that made the sea look like hammered steel. I rose before dawn, unable to keep still, pacing my kitchen while the kettle screamed on the stove. Every vendor I had called earlier in the week was now demanding final payments. Payments I had, redirected to the bride's family by noon. Their calls would flood Clara's phone, and the walls of her perfect day would already begin to crumble. I dressed in a simple black dress, not the gown I had originally chosen. Around my neck rested the silver pendant Clara once wore so proudly, now back where it belonged. I stared at myself in the mirror, whispered a quiet promise to my late husband, and left for the estate. By the time I reached the mansion on the cliffs, guests were streaming in, laughter floating above the tension I knew was brewing. Staff whispered to one another near the kitchens, their brows furrowed over unpaid balances. Daniel greeted relatives at the entrance, his face alight with a joy that twisted my heart. I slipped through a side garden gate, moving quickly among rose bushes and stone paths, until I reached a shadowed alcove at the back of the ballroom. From there, I watched. Clara floated through the crowd like a queen, veil shimmering, smile flawless. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already shifting. When she finally spotted me across the room, her expression hardened. She marched over, her voice dripping with venom, but pitched loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't belong here! Leave!" Gasps rippled through the guests. Daniel looked stricken, caught between loyalty and love. My hands trembled against my clutch, but my voice stayed calm. "If that's what you want," I said, "I'll leave." Then I stepped aside, letting the doors swing wide. Victor Morales entered, his gaze locked on the bride. The color drained from her face, and the bouquet slipped from her fingers to the marble floor. The reckoning had begun. Victor's footsteps echoed across the marble floor, heavy and deliberate. Guests craned their necks, phones already rising in their hands. Clara staggered back a step, her veil trembling as though it too sensed the storm. "Sarah Weston," Victor said, his voice rough but unyielding. "Did you really think you could vanish forever?" The room froze. A ripple of confusion swept over the crowd. Daniel turned sharply, his eyes darting between Victor and the woman he thought he knew. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice raw. Clara shook her head too quickly. "I don't know him. He's lying." "Daniel, don't listen!" Victor pulled a folder from his jacket and tossed photographs onto the front pew. They slid across satin laps, images of Clara in different cities, different names, always leaving destruction behind. I was her partner until she stole $50,000 from me and disappeared. She's been running scams for years. "You're just the latest mark," murmurs rose like a tide, gasps and whispers filling every corner of the ballroom. Daniel picked up one of the photos with shaking hands, staring at the woman in the picture who looked exactly like his bride. Clara lunged forward, voice shrill. "This is insane! He's obsessed! Daniel! He's been stalking me!" Before she could finish, the ballroom doors opened again. 2 federal agents stepped inside, badges raised. The silence was suffocating as they moved forward. "Sarah Weston, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and interstate financial crimes." Clara's scream ripped through the room. She twisted, tried to run, but Victor blocked her path. The agents cuffed her wrists, her veil tangling as she fought. Guests recoiled, some filming, some whispering prayers. Daniel stood frozen, the photograph slipping from his hand. When his eyes finally found mine across the room, they were wide with betrayal and dawning truth. Clara saw it too. Her voice turned venomous. "You think you've won?" She spat at me. "He'll never trust anyone again. You've destroyed him." I didn't flinch, because Daniel's gaze was no longer on her. It was on me. The ballroom emptied slowly that night, the echoes of Clara's screams still clinging to the walls long after the agents had taken her away. Guests whispered in clusters, torn between gossip and sympathy, while Daniel lingered at the edge of it all. Pale and hollow-eyed, I wanted to rush to him, to hold him as I had when he was a child, but I knew this wound was his to face first. Eventually, he crossed the room toward me. For a moment we just stood there, mother and son, the silence between us heavy with all that had been lost. Then, without words, he unclasped the silver pendant from Clara's neck and pressed it back into my palm. My fingers closed around it, its familiar weight a reminder that some things endure even when everything else falls apart. We did not speak of forgiveness that night, nor of blame. Instead, we walked together into the cool air beyond the ballroom doors, letting the sea wind wash over us. He leaned on me, not as a boy needing protection, but as a man who had finally seen the truth. Later, alone in my room, I thought of Clara's parting words, her promise that he would never trust again. But she was wrong. Trust isn't destroyed in one day. It is rebuilt in the quiet persistence of love, in the stubborn choice to believe in what remains. Sometimes the most important weddings are the ones that never take place. I kept my glass steady as the chandeliers threw ribbons of light across the ballroom. The string quartet softened to a shimmer, and the photographer crouched for the father of the bride toast. My name is Rowena Caldwell, and from the far edge of table 12, I could see the head table perfectly and hear every word like it was meant for me. My father, Harold Hensley, rose with the authority he wears like a tailored suit. "Tonight is about legacy," he said, smile polished, microphone warm in his palm. "We've sold Hensley Systems, 60 million, and the future is bright for you." Chairs creaked as people leaned in. Then he glanced past the flowers, past the champagne tower, and found me. "Rowena, you're getting nothing!" Laughter spread in ripples. My mother looked down. Julia, flawless in silk, caught Ethan's hand. Somewhere a fork struck china and rang. I tasted the copper edge of silence and stood. My napkin slid like a surrender I would not sign. "Who's buying it, Dad?" My voice carried cleaner than I felt. He tipped his glass. "Summit Dynamics," he said, like a verdict. The quartet missed a note. I raised my own glass, the room folding toward me as if someone had opened a door in the air. "Then allow me to congratulate myself." I let the beat land. "I am Summit Dynamics." The laughter ended the way a candle does. One breath, and gone. Phones lifted. Someone whispered, "No way!" Harold blinked hard, recalculating. The bandleader froze mid-gesture. I didn't raise my volume. I didn't need to. "You wanted me out of the story," I said, steady enough to cut glass. "But you sold the story to me." I took one small sip to prove my hand was steady, and for the first time all evening, the room listened. The applause from my father's toast hadn't even died down when I lowered myself back into the chair. No one wanted. It sat on the far rim of the ballroom, tucked near a service door where waiters slipped in and out with trays of champagne. They'd placed me here deliberately, out of focus, a shadow guest in a family portrait meant to shine only on my sisters. From that corner, I could see everything. Julia, the bride, glowed in lace and pearls, her smile rehearsed for every camera angle. Vivian, the eldest, leaned close to her husband, pearls around her throat like tiny declarations of superiority. Harold and Margaret presided over the head table with their practiced grace, as if this wedding was less a union and more a press release about the Hensleys' enduring power. My place card had been printed in a smaller font than the others. I noticed it the moment I sat down, a detail most would overlook. But I'd been trained by a lifetime of quiet slights to notice everything. It wasn't anger that burned through me as I watched my family toast without me. It was recognition. They hadn't changed, and neither had I. At least not in the way they assumed. A woman with a clipboard, one of the wedding coordinators, approached me earlier with a tight smile. "Miss Caldwell, this way, please." She guided me to the far edge with a precision that told me she'd been instructed. Not too close to the head table, not too far to be accused of cruelty, just far enough to remind me that I did not belong. I stirred the ice in my glass and listened to the murmur of conversations around me. Guests whispered my name, Rowena, as though it were a cautionary tale. They remembered the daughter who left in disgrace, the one who never quite fit. The invisible child who wasn't charming enough to be Julia, or polished enough to be Vivian. It had been more than a decade since we'd all been in the same room. Time had carved lines into Harold's face, but his pride was untouched. His posture still steel. Margaret wore satin navy, her hands folded in her lap, eyes trained on the floor as if afraid of catching mine. That silence of hers was louder than any insult. Dinner plates clinked, and waiters moved in a practiced dance. I caught Julia's glance once across the room. A flicker of nervousness before she masked it with another smile. She knew I wouldn't simply sit quietly forever. That much, at least. She had always understood. I felt the weight of the room pressing down, the same weight I'd grown up under. But this time, I wasn't here to ask for a place. I was here to remind them the seat they tried to deny me had already been built elsewhere. Bigger, stronger, mine. And from the edge of that ballroom, with roses perfuming the air and chandeliers catching every glance, I let them believe they still had the upper hand. For now, I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than oxygen. Every Sunday meant polished shoes, ironed dresses, and smiles staged for the benefit of neighbors who drove by too slowly. To the outside world, the Hensleys looked like the picture of American success. A father who built a company from a garage, a mother who never let the curtains wrinkle, and 3 daughters framed like trophies on the mantle of legacy. But inside, the air was different. Vivian, the eldest, was groomed as the shining star. Every recital, every exam, every date she brought home was applauded like a stock market gain. Julia, the youngest, floated on her sweetness, golden curls and doe eyes that excused every mistake. If she crashed the family car, my father chuckled. If she skipped her chores, my mother patted her cheek. Then there was me, Rowena, too curious, too blunt, too unwilling to smile when silence was expected. My mind lived in numbers and circuits, in sketches of programs that I thought might change the way business worked. By the time I was 12, I had built a system on our old desktop that could track inventory faster than any paper ledger. I remember carrying the printouts to my father, my heart pounding with hope. He didn't look up from his drink. "Don't mistake your little hobbies for real business, Rowena. Life isn't about being the smartest in the room. It's about being useful." His voice was smooth, but the words cut bone deep. My mother sat beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap. I waited for her to speak, to say something, anything, but she smoothed the napkin over her knees and kept her eyes lowered. Later, when I asked why she never defended me, she whispered, "You're strong, stronger than you know. You'll be fine." But I didn't want to be fine. I wanted to be seen. Each dinner became a test I never passed. Vivian boasted about internships. Julia performed a new song. My father raised his glass in approval. When I spoke of algorithms or the future of logistics, the table fell silent, until someone changed the subject. That silence grew louder each year, until it drowned out everything I was. By 23, I'd had enough. One night, after another brutal dinner, where my father told me I was an embarrassment to the family brand, I packed a suitcase and left. No one followed. No one asked where I was going. A week later, I wrote a letter. Not to my father, who would have tossed it unread, but to my mother. 3 pages, ink smudged from my hand, shaking. I told her I didn't hate her, that I only wanted to know if she had ever loved me the way she loved my sisters. I asked her to believe in me, just once. No reply ever came. That was the fracture I carried with me. Sharper than my father's insults, deeper than my sister's smirks. The silence of the one person who should have said I mattered. And that silence followed me long after I walked out the front door. The first place I landed wasn't glamorous. A damp garage behind a peeling duplex in a town where no one cared about last names. The rent was cheap because the roof leaked, and in winter I could see my breath curl into the air before dawn. A mattress on the floor, a single outlet, and a second-hand desk barely big enough for my battered laptop. That was my kingdom. By day, I hauled boxes at a distribution warehouse. Steel-toed boots, 12-hour shifts, aching muscles that screamed each night. No one there knew I was Harold Hensley's daughter. They only knew me as Rowena, the quiet woman who stacked crates faster than most men, and never complained. I listened to women twice my age talk about their kids, their bad knees, their second jobs. For the first time, I wasn't compared to my sisters. I was invisible in the best way. At night, though, I clawed back pieces of myself. I sat cross-legged on the mattress, laptop balanced on my knees, teaching myself new programming languages, building and breaking frameworks just to understand how they worked. I lived on ramen noodles and black coffee. When the heater failed, I built a makeshift unit from scrap parts just to keep my hands from freezing over the keyboard. 3 months in, I had the skeleton of an idea, a platform that could predict supply chain needs in real time, cutting costs companies like my father's bled dry. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to impress investors. It was designed to work. I scraped together enough courage to pitch it. Venture capital firms didn't laugh. But they didn't listen either. One told me I had a strong face for a woman in logistics, but lacked the charisma to lead. Another asked if I had a male partner who could walk him through the pitch. By the 5th rejection, I stopped waiting for fairness. The lowest moment came when I trusted the wrong man. An angel investor who promised seed money, signed papers, posed in photos, and pulled out the day the server went live. Overnight, my account sank below 0. I stared at my reflection in a cracked mirror. Hollow-eyed, a scar on my wrist from soldering metal too quickly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I gripped the sink until my knuckles went white and whispered into the silence, steady and certain. I will build this again. And this time, no one will stop me. That night, Rowena Caldwell died a little, and Ivy Morgan was born. Ivy Morgan wasn't just a name I wrote on legal forms. It was armor. Rowena Caldwell carried baggage. The invisible daughter. The family's disappointment. But Ivy? Ivy could be anyone. Sharp, faceless, untouchable. I filed the paperwork under a Delaware holding company, built a trust structure so layered even the IRS would struggle to peel it back. My first hire wasn't an engineer or a developer. It was a lawyer, Victor Lane, a man who specialized in invisibility. His only instruction was to make sure Ivy Morgan remained a ghost. I didn't buy billboards or beg for headlines. I bought warehouses, trucking routes, packaging plants, the bones of commerce no one paid attention to. I replaced outdated systems with my own algorithms, sleek and efficient, disguised as third-party upgrades. Companies toasted themselves for lowering costs, never realizing the veins of their operations were slowly running on my code. And then came Hensley Systems, my father's company, the one that had tossed me aside. They signed contracts with innovative suppliers and strategic partners, unaware that every dotted line funneled back to Summit Dynamics, back to me. The irony was almost poetic. My father prided himself on due diligence, but arrogance makes for sloppy eyesight. Each time one of his executives celebrated a more efficient quarter, I sat quietly in my modest office, watching the graphs climb on my monitor. They were cheering their own dependency, never knowing the daughter they had erased was the one pulling the strings. Then Ethan appeared on my radar, Julia's fiancé, newly promoted in Hensley's partnerships division. He treated contracts like trophies, bragging about exclusive deals that landed on his desk. He had no idea those deals were mine. I let him think he was clever. let him preen in front of Julia and my father, but his arrogance was clumsy. Soon, his emails hinted at side payments, consulting fees funneled into offshore accounts. I instructed my team to approve every adjustment he requested, not to help him, but to build the rope he would hang himself with. Meanwhile, Victor embedded a forensic accountant into Hensley's upcoming audit. Xiaosh. Each wire transfer, each falsified invoice, each shell account was cataloged and stored in a folder marked confidential. I didn't rush. Revenge done right is never loud. It creeps in like fog, unnoticed until it blankets everything. And by the time Ethan realized what he had signed, it would already be too late. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, thick cream paper with embossed lettering. My name sat in stiff calligraphy across the front. Rowena Caldwell. No dear, no warmth. Inside, the invitation to Julia's wedding glittered with gold trim and careful words, followed by a smaller, handwritten note. Seating is limited for dinner. Hope you understand. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a performance. A way to say, you're tolerated, not included. For a moment, I almost threw it away. Let them believe I was too wounded to show up, too bitter to face them. But that same night, while reviewing a merger file, I found it. A footnote buried in a legal memo, pending final board vote on proposed equity sale to private buyer. The buyer was listed as Summit Dynamics, my company. My father was preparing to sell Hensley Systems, to announce it at Julia's wedding as his grand finale. Suddenly, the invitation wasn't an insult. It was an opportunity. I called Victor, my attorney, and instructed him to assemble every document proving Summit Dynamics already controlled nearly as half of Hensley's supply chain. Contracts, signed board approvals, clauses granting me veto rights. It all went into a sleek black folder. Then I called my assistant. I want a team on standby. Media, legal. Someone who can stream from their phone without drawing attention. If we go public, we control the narrative in 60 seconds. The preparations carried me through the following weeks. I selected my wardrobe carefully. A navy dress. Understated but strong. The kind of outfit that wouldn't beg for attention, but would command it when the moment came. On the morning of the wedding, I stood before the mirror. I thought of the girl in the freezing garage, whispering promises into the cracked glass. I thought of the letter my mother never answered. This wasn't about being invited. It was about arriving on my own terms. So I picked up the folder, slipped it into my clutch, and walked out the door. Let them toast their victory. They had no idea they'd already sold it to me. The ballroom shimmered under crystal light as waiters moved like chess pieces between tables. Julia's gown caught every flash of the cameras. Ethan at her side, smug in his new suit. My seat remained at the margin, but I felt no sting, just anticipation. When Harold rose for the final toast, silence swept the room. His voice was steady, heavy with self-importance. Tonight isn't only about love. It's about legacy. After long consideration, I've sold Hensley Systems, $60 million, to Summit Dynamics. The future is secure for my daughters. Guests clapped. Julia beamed. Vivian smirked. Then came the blade. As for Rowena, you'll receive nothing. The laughter started soft, then spread. I stood. My napkin slipped from my lap like a signal. Who's buying it, father? He lifted his chin. Summit Dynamics. I raised my glass. Then let me congratulate myself. I am Summit Dynamics. The air shattered. Forks dropped. Phones rose. Whispers cut like insects through the silence. Harold blinked, confused, then pale. Ethan shifted, already sensing danger. I stepped forward and pulled the folder from my clutch. You didn't vet your buyer. You were so eager to erase me that you signed without seeing who held the pen. Victor, my attorney, emerged with stamped contracts, SEC filings, board approvals. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But I wasn't finished. I opened a slimmer folder. This contains evidence of embezzlement, unauthorized fees, offshore accounts. The screen behind the head table flickered alive. Emails, spreadsheets, wire transfers. Ethan shot to his feet, face drained. This is a lie! I didn't point. I didn't need to. You signed every deal. Every payment trail leads to you. Julia's hand slipped from his. I knew, she whispered, voice trembling. I knew it was you. Rowena. I saw the signatures. I was jealous. And I said nothing. Vivian's voice cut through next, sharp with fury. No, the real blame is you. Harold! You turned us into rivals. Rowena was never the problem. You were. She stormed out, pearls swinging. The room fractured. Gasps, whispers, flashes. Harold's empire crumbled in real time. And for once, I didn't have to raise my voice. The truth did it for me. The ballroom was still humming with shock when I lowered myself back into my chair. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their approval. I had already won the only battle that mattered. They could never erase me again. In the weeks that followed, Harold clawed desperately at control. With Lena Brooks, he tried to slip in hidden clauses, draft secret agreements, and undermine the sale. But arrogance left fingerprints. In the emergency board meeting, I presented every trace of their collusion, every timestamp, every email. The vote was swift. Lena stripped of power. Harold barred from any future role. The empire he worshipped was no longer his. A few days later, Margaret asked to meet beneath the sycamore outside the old church. No audience, no crystal, just two women and decades of silence between them. She admitted her cowardice, that she had chosen comfort over courage. Her words trembled, but I didn't press. I only said, I was never a failure. Remember that? It was all I needed. Julia came next, stripped of pearls and mascara, asking for a chance to prove herself. I gave her a trial position at Summit Dynamics. No favoritism, no shortcuts. For once, she didn't argue. She just nodded. And me? I sit at the head of a table I built myself. I think of the girl in the garage, frozen fingers tapping code in the dark, whispering she would build again. She did. This was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was denied, and proving I never needed their permission to belong.